7,000 islands in the Western Pacific preserved a mythology that describes a cosmic serpent devouring celestial bodies, divine wars fought before human existence, and the creation of humans from the actions of supreme deities. These records were chanted in ritual ceremonies for centuries before any European ship reached Philippine shores. Western scholars catalogued them as regional folklore. They never compared them to the Anunnaki tablets sitting in the British Museum in London. That comparison changes everything. In the late 19th century, Assyriologists had already spent decades translating 7 clay tablets pulled from the buried ruins of ancient Nineveh in modern-day Iraq. These fragments, now housed in glass cases at the British Museum, contained the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic carved in Akkadian cuneiform more than 3,700 years ago. Visitors walk past them every day, most unaware of what the ancient script actually contains. The tablets describe a war among the gods that preceded the existence of the physical world. They list weapons, armies, chains of command, and a defeated goddess whose corpse was split in two to form the sky and the earth. This is not vague poetry. Scholars like Stephanie Daly of Oxford University have spent decades translating every line. The narrative is coherent, it is sequential, and it is disturbingly specific. The story begins before Earth exists. 2 primordial beings occupy the void. Apsu represents fresh water. Tiamat represents the salt sea. From their mingling came the first generation of gods. These younger gods grew loud and restless. Apsu decided to destroy them. But a clever deity named Ea struck first. He killed Apsu with a ritual spell and built his dwelling upon the corpse. Tiamat, now a widow, raised an army to avenge her husband. The tablets describe 11 specific monster types she created for war. Serpents with venom for blood, dragon creatures carved into Mesopotamian cylinder seals for centuries, scorpion warriors, fishmen. She appointed a general named Kingu and handed him the Tablet of Destinies, the object that controls fate itself. The younger gods panicked. None could face Tiamat until a deity named Marduk stepped forward. His offer came with conditions. If he won, the divine assembly must grant him supreme authority over all gods. He would become king of the cosmos. The assembly agreed. They had no other choice. Marduk rode to battle in a storm chariot armed with lightning and winds. He released the winds into Tiamat's body when she opened her mouth to devour him. The winds bloated her from within. While she was helpless, Marduk shot an arrow through her heart. Tiamat fell. Marduk stood upon her corpse. He captured her army. He seized Kingu and stripped him of the Tablet of Destinies. Then he did something that changes how we understand the entire narrative. He split Tiamat's body in 2. Half became the sky, half became the earth. The physical world we inhabit was fashioned from the remains of a defeated god. This is not creation through divine will. This is construction from war spoils. But the surviving gods complained. The labour of maintaining creation was endless, the tasks were beneath them. So Marduk proposed a solution. Create a new being, a servant species to bear the yoke. Kingu was brought forward. His blood was drained. From that divine blood mixed with clay, humanity was fashioned. The Enuma Elish is explicit. The purpose of human existence is to free the gods from work. A parallel Akkadian text called the Atrahasis, dated to roughly 1700 BCCE, tells the same story from a different angle. In that version, the gods called Igigi were forced to dig canals and maintain the world for 3,600 years. They rebelled, they burned their tools, they surrounded the chief god's dwelling. This divine labour strike forced the creation of humanity as replacement workers. 2 separate ancient texts, preserved on different tablets from different periods, tell essentially the same story. Mainstream Assyriology explains the Enuma Elish as political propaganda. Babylon rose to power in the 2nd millennium BCE. Marduk was Babylon's patron god. The epic elevated him above older Sumerian deities to justify imperial claims through divine narrative. This reading has merit. Political mythology is well documented across the ancient world, but the explanation does not address certain details. The tactical precision of the battle descriptions exceeds what propaganda requires. And more importantly, the same structural motifs keep appearing across civilizations that had no contact with Babylon whatsoever. A primordial ocean, a cosmic serpent, a divine assembly that decrees destruction. Humans created to serve higher beings. These motifs appear in Greek mythology with the war between Olympians and Titans. They appear in Norse mythology with the wars of the Aesir. They appear in the Vedic texts of India. And they appear in a place that Western comparative mythology has almost never examined, the Philippine Islands. More than 7,000 islands stretch across the Western Pacific between the South China Sea and the open ocean. Before the Spanish galleons arrived in 1521, these islands held a civilization with its own writing systems, its own legal codes, and its own cosmology. At the centre of that cosmology was a creature called the Bakunawa. The Bakunawa is a serpent of enormous size. Visayan oral traditions describe it as a dragon that rises from the depths of the ocean to swallow celestial bodies whole. The word itself likely comes from ancient Austronesian roots meaning bent snake. This is not a casual folk tale. The earliest written documentation of the Bakunawa myth comes from a 1913 collection by a researcher named Baiza, published under the title Maga Sugilanong Korean. The text preserves a belief held by pre-colonial Cebuanos for centuries before any European arrived. Their supreme deity Bathala created 7 moons to illuminate the night sky. The Bakunawa, mesmerized by their beauty, rose from the sea and swallowed them one by one until only a single moon remained. Bathala declared the serpent his mortal enemy. Communities across the Visayan Islands banged pots, drums, and metal tools during eclipses to frighten the creature away from devouring the last moon. Some communities in the Philippines still practice this tradition today. This was not children's entertainment. The movements of the Bakunawa served as a geomantic calendar system for tracking agricultural and ceremonial cycles. Babaylan priestesses, the spiritual leaders of pre-colonial Filipino communities, incorporated the serpent's cycles into sacred rituals that governed planting, harvesting, and community governance. The Bakunawa was carved into the hilts of Kampilan swords, the primary war blades of Visayan warriors. Museum collections in Manila and across Southeast Asia hold Kampilan blades, whose pommels depict the Bakunawa with open jaws and horned crests frozen in the act of devouring. Warriors carried the cosmic serpent into battle engraved on their weapons. This creature was embedded in astronomy, warfare, and ceremony. Those are the same 3 domains where Mesopotamian artisans carved images of Tiamat and her army of monsters into stone cylinder seals thousands of years earlier. But the Bakunawa is only the beginning. The ancient Filipinos organized their entire cosmos into 3 realms. Kaluwalhatian was the sky world, home to the supreme deities. Kapatagan was the mortal realm where humans lived. Kasamaan was the underworld ruled by spirits of the dead. Each realm hosted powerful deities who governed different aspects of existence. At the apex stood Bathala, the supreme creator god of the Tagalog people. Beneath him operated a hierarchy of lesser gods, nature spirits, and ancestral beings. This is a tripartite cosmic structure. The Mesopotamian cosmos operated on the same division. The heavens belonged to En, the earth belonged to Enlil, the underworld belonged to Ereshkigal, and the Anunnaki who judged the dead. 2 civilizations separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years built the same 3-tiered blueprint for reality. Then there is the Hinilawad. In 1955, a Filipino anthropologist named F. Landa Jacano was conducting fieldwork in the mountains of Panay Island in the central Philippines. He stumbled upon something entirely by accident. Local communities in the Sulod region still preserved an oral epic of staggering length. After considerable persuasion, a mountain chanter named Hugan-an agreed to be recorded. It took 3 full weeks to capture the entire performance on magnetic tape. The epic runs to 29,000 verses. In its original chanted form, it takes roughly 3 days and 3 nights to complete. This makes the Hinilawad one of the longest epics ever documented in human history. Longer than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, the recordings have since been inscribed in the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. The content of the Hinilawad reads like a Pacific echo of the Enuma Elish. A divine king named Kaptan rules the gods from the sky realm. he decrees that a beautiful goddess named Alencina must marry upon reaching maidenhood. All the gods competed for her hand. She rejected every one of them and chose instead to marry a mortal. The spurned divine suitors convened in assembly. They deliberated, they voted, and they decided to destroy the mortal world by catastrophic flood. The river Hinilawad and all who dwell along it must be wiped from existence. Consider the structure carefully. Spurned divine suitors band together. They seek vengeance by unleashing a catastrophic flood upon a specific river valley. This is the same narrative architecture that drives the Atrahasis epic, the Mesopotamian text where the god Enlil convinces the divine council to send a great flood to eliminate the human race. In both traditions, a faction among the gods dissents. In both traditions, certain mortals receive warning and survive. The Hinilawad was chanted by mountain communities in the interior of Panay for untold generations before any Western scholar heard a single verse of it. Now the question becomes how these parallels arrived in the Pacific. Western scholars have a standard answer. They call it Indianization. Beginning around 200 BCE, Indian traders and Hindu priests travelled across the Bay of Bengal to Southeast Asia. They brought Hinduism and Buddhism, they brought the Sanskrit language, they brought stories of Rahu, the Hindu demon who devours the sun and moon during eclipses. Scholars point to the similarities between Rahu and the Bakunawa, and argue that Filipino serpent mythology was simply borrowed from Indian sources through maritime trade. There is real evidence supporting this connection. Jordan Clark and the Aswang Project, a documentary research initiative focused on Philippine folklore, traced the visual design of the Bakunawa on Visayan Kampilan swords to the Javanese demon Kala Rao, a figure with clear Hindu and Balinese origins. Trade routes carried ideas along with spices and textiles, but the Indianization explanation has a problem that most scholars do not address. The Austronesian peoples who settled the Philippines did not arrive from India. They arrived from Taiwan. The dominant archaeological model, supported by linguistic analysis and genetic evidence, traces the Austronesian expansion beginning around 3000 BCE. These seafaring peoples crossed from mainland Asia to Taiwan, then spread southward through the Philippines, across Indonesia, and eventually reached as far as Madagascar off the coast of Africa and Easter Island in the remote Pacific. This migration is one of the greatest population movements in all of human prehistory. If the Austronesians carried serpent and eclipse mythology with them during this expansion, then the core motif predates Indian contact by more than 2,000 years. It may predate the Vedas themselves, it may predate the Enuma Elish. Some scholars acknowledge this possibility. The indigenous origin perspective holds that Austronesian peoples brought their own conceptions of moon-devouring serpents from wherever they originated. The simplest answer likely involves a mixture of both indigenous belief and later Indian influence layered on top. But Western academia has overwhelmingly favoured the borrowing explanation, treating Philippine mythology as derivative rather than potentially ancestral. There is a reason this blind spot exists. When Spanish colonisers arrived in the Visayan Islands in the 16th century, they carried a mission that extended well beyond territorial conquest. They intended to systematically erase indigenous belief systems. The archives of early missionaries reveal a deliberate campaign of demonizing local deities. Babylonian priestesses were persecuted, arrested and killed. Sacred objects were burned. Ritual chants were forbidden. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Chirino wrote that the native population possessed no religious writings whatsoever. Yet in the very same accounts, Chirino described encountering a native Filipino who owned an indigenous poetic book. The contradiction reveals the colonial project for what it was. Deny the existence of what you are actively destroying. 3 centuries of Spanish rule followed by decades of American occupation buried pre-colonial Philippine culture under layers of foreign narrative. But certain artifacts survived. The Laguna copperplate inscription was discovered in 1989 near the mouth of the Lumbang River in Laguna Province south of Manila. A man found it while dredging sand from the riverbed. This thin copper plate bears an inscription dated to the Shaka year, 822, which corresponds to 900 CE in the Gregorian calendar. The text is written primarily in Old Malay, using the Kawi script of ancient Java, with several technical terms borrowed directly from Sanskrit. It records the forgiveness of a specific debt and names individual people, political titles, and geographic locations across a network spanning the Philippines and the Malay world. This single artifact pushed back the documented beginning of Filipino written history by 600 years, and it proved something essential. Sanskrit, the sacred language of the Vedic hymns, the language that preserves the stories of Rahu and divine wars in heaven, was being used in Philippine legal transactions more than 1,000 years ago. The physical evidence sits in museum cases in Manila and abroad. The mythological evidence sits in transcripts and on aging magnetic tape recordings. When you place the two traditions side by side, the structural parallels become very difficult to dismiss. In Mesopotamia, the world begins with primordial waters. Apsu and Tiamat mingle to produce the gods. In the Visayan creation tradition recorded by scholars at the University of Pittsburgh, the world was only a great sea of water above which stretched an endless sky. The water was the kingdom of the god Magwayan. The sky was ruled by the great god Kaptan. From their interaction came the first beings, two primordial water deities producing the cosmos. Two civilizations, two oceans apart. In Mesopotamia, Tiamat raises an army of 11 monster types, serpents and dragons and scorpion beings. In the Philippines, the Bakunawa does not stand alone. The Maranao people of Mindanao describe the Aramaonga, a creature that resembles a lion crossed with a dragon. The Hiligaynon tradition of the Western Visayas speaks of the Olimao, a winged serpent of enormous size. The Bagabo people of southern Mindanao tell of the Minokawa, a dragon-shaped bird large enough to swallow the sun. The Mandaya of the eastern coast describe the Tambanocano, a giant crab that causes eclipses by grasping the moon in its claws. Complete bestiary of cosmic monsters exists across the ethnic groups of the Philippine archipelago. Each one is associated with celestial destruction. Each one serves a cosmological function. This is not a single borrowed story. This is a system. In Mesopotamia, the Divine Assembly votes to send a flood. In the Hinilawad, the Divine Assembly votes to send a flood. In both narratives, a faction of gods opposes the decision. In both narratives, survival follows through divine descent. In Mesopotamia, Marduk splits Tiamat's body to form the sky and the earth. In multiple Philippine creation traditions, the world emerges through an act of separation or division performed by a creator deity. The cosmos does not gradually evolve. It is constructed from something that existed before, broken apart and reassembled into the world that humans now inhabit. Western comparative mythologists spent most of the 20th century mapping connections between Mesopotamia and Greece, between Egypt and the ancient Near East, between Sumerian flood tablets and the Hebrew scriptures. They built entire academic departments around these comparisons. They rarely extended the same analytical tools to the Pacific. Not because the parallels were absent. The parallels were always there, but the academic infrastructure was not looking for them. The Philippines sat outside the traditional boundaries of ancient civilization studies as defined by European universities. Its oral traditions were not written on clay tablets fired in kilns. They were not sealed in tombs or buried in desert sand. They lived in the memories of mountain chanters on remote islands, in the carvings on Campilan sword hilts, in the eclipse rituals of Babylonian priestesses who were systematically hunted during 3 centuries of colonial suppression. Contemporary scholarship has only recently begun to reassess the damage. Interdisciplinary approaches combining anthropology, linguistics, and archaeology are revealing how colonial-era records distorted indigenous agency and erased the complexity of pre-colonial belief systems. Grace Barreto Tesoro of the University of the Philippines presented evidence of pre-colonial cosmology at the Society for American Archaeology conference in 2015. Filipino scholars working in Manila, Cebu, and Iloilo continue recovering fragments of what the colonial period nearly destroyed. But the comparative mythological work connecting these traditions to the ancient Near East remains largely undone. The parallels sit in plain sight. The question is who will finally examine them with the same rigour that has been applied to Mesopotamia and Greece for over a century. The Enuma Elish sits behind glass in the British Museum, preserved in a climate-controlled case studied by generations of scholars from every major university, translated into dozens of languages. The Hinilawad exists on magnetic tape recorded across 3 weeks in 1955 from the memory of a single woman named Hugan-an in the mountains of Panay Island. If she had refused to sing that day, if Jokano had never visited that village, 29,000 verses of Philippine cosmology would have vanished with her generation. One tradition was preserved because a European archaeologist pulled it from the sand of Nineveh in 1849. The other nearly died because no one thought to look for it in the mountains of the central Philippines. Both describe divine wars fought before human history began. Both feature cosmic serpents involved in the destruction of celestial bodies. Both include a divine council that votes on the fate of the world below. Both explain human existence as something created for the benefit of higher beings. The tablets of Babylon have told us what they contain. The chants of Panay have told us what they remember. The question is not whether these records exist, they do. The question is why it took this long for anyone to place them side by side, and what it means that when you finally do, the patterns match.